I am home. I give you comfort. I shelter your family. See me for who I am. Home, sweet home. I am your refuge. I am the floor that supports you. The foundation that keeps you steady. The walls that give you shelter. The roof that protects you. I am your home. If you don't take care of me, I cannot take care of you.
That applause is to Mother Earth, who deserves it as much as any of the great speakers we have here today. The next one is a guy who's working with a very important topic. He's a guy who works from the EAT Foundation, and they've got this tiny little challenge that is that when you need to feed 9 billion people at the same time, how in the world do we do that? And if we then also want to feed them in a way that's healthy, and that's sustainable, well then it becomes an almost insurmountable challenge. But luckily we brought a guy who was not afraid to take that on. And I would like you now to introduce you, ladies and gentlemen, to Brent Loken.
Thank you very much, everybody. This is a great honor to be here and to be speaking at this very important summit. And I mean, even the name of the summit is so cool, the Bridge Summit. And I think one of the things that's so important and what I want to stress about is that we have to start breaking down these silos. And the thing that's so cool about this summit is that we are trying to break down the silos between science and business. The problems are huge. We can't solve them alone. We have to come together. We have to work together. So kudos, thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here. I might have to take some water. My girls gave me their cold. Woke up this morning with a sore throat, so I might have to be drinking some water throughout this. So I'm going to be talking about a small topic. How are we going to feed 9 billion people a healthy and sustainable diet? Pretty small challenge, right? But before I get into that, I want to get into a little bit about how I got here, how I actually got to this stage, because just a few years ago I was doing something very different. You can see from these pictures, they might not have a lot to do with food and health, but actually they do. I was working on the island of Borneo, running a conservation organization, working on helping local communities to protect iconic species like orangutans, clouded leopards, all these really great, big, large animals. And by living with these local communities for almost 5 years, I started to realize that people weren't talking about conservation. They weren't talking about orangutans. What they were talking about was food and health. Again and again and again, over dinners, through ceremonies, the same message came home. People were interested in what their kids were eating, the health of their kids, the diets of their kids, and that was the main issue on the plate. Now, what I started to see through this is that the diets of the local communities were changing greatly. That what they were doing, they were selling off their farmlands. You can see this up in the upper right-hand corner is how they used to grow rice. They were selling those off to palm oil companies, getting the profits, and then buying rice. They were selling off their local vegetable patches and fruit patches to palm oil companies and buying fruit and vegetables. Getting the profits from those, thinking, well, now I can just buy it in the market. However, what was happening is that when they went to the market, there weren't enough fruits and vegetables, or else they were rotten, or else they were too expensive. So instead, what they chose to do is they were buying their rice, but they were also choosing to buy cheaper products, like ramen noodles, highly processed cakes and crackers. And they were sending their kids off to school eating raw, uncooked ramen noodles for breakfast. Can you imagine that? And highly processed crackers, and thinking, I mean, no wonder why these kids are not able to focus for a full 8 hours every single day at school. No wonder why kids were getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And they were coming to us, and I was beginning to realize that really everything came back to this issue of food. Now, the agricultural system, the food system is absolutely broken, and there's no place on the planet which typifies this really more than the island of Borneo. This is what the landscape looks like. One of the most biologically rich places on the entire planet, filled with unbelievable biodiversity, and this is what it looks like right now. Mainly being leveled for one monocrop called the oil palm. Now, I'm not here to bash oil palm because it's actually a very productive crop. It's brought economic development to the region, so there are some benefits of it. But the negative sides are loss of biodiversity, and if you think back to the film that we just saw, we have to treat Mother Earth extremely well, or else other systems are also going to suffer. This is what Borneo looks like right now. Incredible biodiversity being replaced for one single species, which is also impacting what people eat. It's impacting their culture. It's having impact and ripple effects throughout everything. So I wanted to change, and I wanted to find an organization which was actually focusing on this, not just on sustainability issues, but on sustainability, food, and health. And it was really hard to find an organization out there focusing on food, until I came across EAT, which is an Oslo-based organization, and I'll talk a bit about it more later. But EAT focuses on the nexus of food, health, and sustainability. And what it does, very similar to what we're trying to do here at the Bridge Summit, building bridges between policymakers, business leaders, and the scientific community. Because these challenges are absolutely huge. We will not solve them unless we break down the silos and start working together. So, simply put, this is what we're trying to solve. How are we going to feed 9 billion people a healthy and sustainable diet? That's really at the core of what our organization does. So let's get into the problem a little bit deeper. What is it? Now, human health has actually been pretty good lately, and we've never been this healthy. Life expectancy has been increasing since the 1950s. Poverty has been going down. Good things. Child mortality has been going down. So these are actually really good things. Human health is on the right track. However, it's on the right track at the expense of the environment. We have been exploiting the environment at an unprecedented rate. Human health is improving, environmental health is actually decreasing. If you look at almost any indicator of environmental health, whether you're looking at carbon dioxide emissions going up, ocean acidification, energy use, tropical forest loss, water use, fertilizer use, they all follow the same pattern, the same hockey stick type exponential pathway going up and up and up. And it's really been increasing since the 1950s. It's the Great Acceleration. We're on a path right now which we can't actually continue, as these graphs should clearly demonstrate. Before, 10, 20, 30 years ago, we used to think that we could do anything to planet Earth. We could take what we wanted, we could put in whatever we wanted, but we're now finding that that's actually not the case. That planet Earth has certain boundaries, certain limits that we can't cross. And some of you guys may have seen this, developed by colleagues at the Stockholm Resilience Center, Johan Rockström and others. It's this concept that Earth has actually quantifiable boundaries which we cannot pass. We can actually now begin to quantify how much carbon dioxide we can put into the atmosphere. We can actually quantify how much biodiversity we can take out of certain systems before impacting that system. We can quantify how much nitrogen and phosphorus use we can put into systems. We have limits, which is represented here by this red line. If we start to cross those critical thresholds, we're going to impact these systems, and those systems are going to lead to runaway changes that right now we have no idea what those are. We're right at the beginning of this great experiment. Let's get into one of the systems first. Let's talk about climate change, because I think that's something that a lot of us have heard quite a bit about. We just signed a monumental global agreement in Paris just a few months ago. But I want to show you the scope of the problem here and the scale of the problem just by focusing on climate change, because this is something that's not only going to impact Sweden, it's going to impact the entire world. If you look at the red line, actually the agreement was we need to keep global temperatures below 2 degrees Celsius. That is what we said we have to do. That's actually the upper limit. Above that, things are going to get pretty nasty for that. Below that, things are going to change, but could be manageable. Between 1.5 and 2 degrees is actually better. So 2 degrees is the upper limit. The current commitments by the countries of the world that submitted this to the Paris is represented by the red line. That puts us on a pathway to 3.5 degrees Celsius and could be as high as 6.3 degrees. What that says is that current country commitments is not enough. We need to actually bend the red curve down to this green curve so that we stay below 2 degree increase. How are we going to do that? Do we wait for national governments to do that? This is where I think business leaders are going to actually come in. Business leaders are the new social activists. Business leaders can actually come in and make innovative changes within their companies to help us bend this curve. Without businesses, we will not be able to make this. So businesses are absolute critical partners on this journey. And as we think about climate change, we have to be looking at long-term climate change. We can't just be looking at what has happened over the past 10, 15, 20, 50 years. We have to be thinking about it on a scale of thousands of years. If you look back, we are exiting the Holocene epoch, which is a very stable time on Earth. Everything that we've accomplished, everything that the human species has been done within this epoch of relative temperature stability. Temperatures haven't really changed over the last 10,000 years. Right now, they're increasing extremely fast. What we're saying with Paris is we have to keep it down to this bottom line going off to the right. The other 3 lines above that are anywhere from 3.5 degrees to 6.5 degrees increase. That's going to get really bad for us. But the thing that I want you to get out of this is that the pathway that we set right now, the decisions that we make, are going to impact Earth for the next 5 to 10,000 years. Not just for your kids, not just for your kids' kids, but we're talking about we're setting Earth's course for thousands and thousands of years. That's why this time period is absolutely critical. So we have just exited out of this very stable Holocene era. We're tipping into a new era called the Anthropocene, and I'm sure you've heard some of that in the news. However, what this basin of attraction, this new era, is going to look like is really up to us. Is it going to be a really nasty future of 3.5 to 6 degree changes, or can we keep it below 2 degrees and make it manageable for us? So let's get into food. What does food have to do with this? Food is absolutely central to all of these issues. Why? Because 25% of greenhouse gas emissions comes directly from the agricultural sector. 1/4 of all emissions. Now, not all the agricultural sector though. When you look at it, most of them comes from production of beef. Poultry and pork, much less. Certain types of fish production as well, mostly trawling, and certain types of aquaculture are pretty bad as well. 16% of the 25% comes from producing red meat. So you can see the leverage points in the system and where we can actually focus if we want to make large changes in a very short time. So if you look at fruits, vegetables, legumes, they actually have a much lower impact in terms of total emissions. In terms of global land use, 40% of Earth's land is devoted to agriculture. 40% right now. About 26% goes into cattle, some sort of cattle production, cattle grazing or other sorts of commons grazing, roughly the size of all of Africa. About 13 to 14% goes into all other types of production. So right now we're currently using 40% of Earth's land. And the single larger destroyer of forests, causer of deforestation, comes directly from the agricultural industry. Since 80% of the biodiversity on land is found in forests, agriculture is directly impacting Earth's biodiversity. If you think back to those images about what is happening on the island of Borneo, it kind of starts to hit home. Now, when we think about what's going to happen between now and 2050, we need 70% more total calories on planet Earth if we're going to feed anywhere from between 9 to 10 billion people. If we stick with the status quo, how things are going, you start to get a picture. It's going to be pretty hard to get there. There's not even enough land to be able to do it. So there has to be some very dramatic changes that we take in terms of how we produce food and what kind of food we actually eat. You add climate change on top of that, and climate change is going to decrease productivity all over the planet. So we're going to have to learn how to produce more food on less land and on less productive land. That's a great monumental challenge in terms of how we get there. That's just the land. Let's look at the oceans. 90%, current research is showing that up to 90% of total fish stocks are overfished. Fish is a very important food stock and food staple for many people on this planet. If this collapses, it's going to be really hard to meet the goal of feeding between 9 to 10 billion people. The marine capture follows the same kind of hockey stick type upward curve. We need to figure out how to start flattening this curve. We cannot continue to go on this path. If we do, by 2050, 70% of all global greenhouse gas emissions will come directly from the agricultural sector. Let's switch to health. So that's just from the greenhouse gas standpoint. But if we switch to health, things aren't actually much better. Right now, 60% of all global deaths come from NCDs. Diabetes, cancer, heart disease. 60% of all global deaths. China accounts for 1/3 of all diabetes on this planet. Diabetes rates on this entire planet. 60%. And this comes from the types of food that we eat. And on top of that, almost 2 billion people are either obese or overweight, and we still have close to 1 billion people that are starving. They go to bed hungry every single night. How can this be acceptable in 2016 that we still allow 1 billion people on this planet to go to bed hungry? When we add the number of people that are overweight with the number of people that have micronutrient deficiencies, we get more than half the global population. So we can see that food is a big issue. People either have too much of it or they don't have enough, or they're eating the wrong types of things. In addition, 1/3 of all the food that we eat is wasted. 1/3 is wasted. We still allow almost 1 billion people to go to bed hungry every single night. So how do we change the system? Is it insurmountable? I actually think it's quite simple. But we have to change the path that we're on. And traditionally, how we've looked at food, we've looked at it along a more healthy to less healthy pathway. However, we also have to add a y-axis here of less sustainable and more sustainable. We have to start taking and saying, the food down here, such as beef, is definitely less sustainable and less healthy. We have to start eating up in the upper right-hand quadrant, eating foods like fruits, legumes, nuts and seeds, whole grains, olive oils. Because the food that we eat, we have to start thinking of both from a health and a sustainability standpoint. We need to bend the curve up and start eating up in the upper right-hand corner. What's great about this is that a healthy diet is not only good for you, it's also good for the planet. So it's really a win-win scenario for all of us. On top of that, you start eating a healthy diet. These are different types of diets. You can see Mediterranean, pescatarian, vegetarian diets. Decreases your risk to type 2 diabetes, cancers, heart diseases. Once again, it's healthy for people, healthy for the planet. But what is happening now? We're overproducing things like red meat by almost 468%, and underproducing things like fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds. And so we need to change the system. Certain policy implications could have very large impacts. For example, if we encourage a reduction in red meat consumption, it could reduce total global mortality by 6 to 10%, and total global greenhouse gas emissions by anywhere between 29 to 70% by 2050. These are huge impacts just from eating less red meat. China just instituted their new dietary guidelines, which they do once every 10 years. China has gone from a country which was facing severe malnutrition just a generation ago to a country which is facing obesity problems in a single generation. Their new dietary guidelines are encouraging its citizens to reduce meat consumption by 50%. If every Chinese person adopted this, it could reduce total global greenhouse gas emissions from between 1 to 1.5%. From a single country, albeit a very large country, but a single country adopting a policy guideline to eat less meat. Just imagine what we could do with this if we adopted this all over the planet. You know how many countries on the planet have sustainability and health in their national guidelines? 4. Sweden, Germany, Brazil, and also Qatar are the only 4 countries that have adopted both health and sustainability standards in their dietary guidelines. So what's the solution? You've probably seen this, the 17 SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals agreed upon by the nations of the world back in September. These are broad and these are big, and we have to accomplish them by 2030. That's only 15 years. We have no time to waste. And these are big. I mean, they're reduce gender inequalities, zero hunger by 2030, no poverty by 2030, ensuring life on land, ensuring life in the water. These are very large sustainable development goals. And one of the criticisms of this is what is the connector between all of these very different, what seems to be very different goals. When you start to dig into the 17 goals and the 169 targets that come with them, the thing that really binds these things, the glue that holds them together, is food connects all of them. Food is really found everywhere throughout these. If we can change the food system, if we get it right with food, we get it right with sustainable development. If we don't get it right with food, we will not be able to accomplish these goals by 2030, guaranteed. However, I think the way that those goals are viewed in terms of very flat, linear structure is a bit hard to understand. And Johan Rockström and others just came up with this actually and presented it last week at the EAT Forum, which we held last week in Stockholm. I think looking at it in a more of a wedding cake type shape is a little bit better. And this comes back to some of the videos that we've been watching here, and a lot of the talks that we had from this morning in terms of the very bottom of this cake is really the biosphere. We have to protect the biosphere. If we mess up the biosphere, if we hurt the ecosystems of the world, nothing else matters. And really the social systems, society, the economy are embedded within that. So that is really the foundation. We have to maintain that Mother Nature is actually healthy. We have to treat her with respect, and the economy will follow, healthy societies will follow as well. So this is the greatest opportunity for humanity, but it's a really tricky nut to crack. It's a really tricky problem to solve. And we are the first generation to be able to know something about this, to become aware of what the problem is, and we're probably the last generation to be able to do something about it. It's a huge opportunity, and a huge opportunity for business as well. How are we going to do it? I want to give one example. I'm sure some of you in here read the Global Opportunity Report, which comes out every year. The number one opportunity from this year is this thing called smart farming. And this is just an example. I don't want to promote it or anything, but it's an example of what we can do. Smart farming has been promoted as being a way that we can increase profits for business, increase productivity on land, decrease waste by integrating technology into current farming practices. Simple solutions that can be adopted today that can have global impacts. What do I mean by this is that when we look at farming traditionally in agricultural systems, what we end up having is traditionally we think about farming systems like we're going to put something into the system. We're going to put in water, fertilizers, machinery, pesticides. What we get out of it are things like employment, food, fibers. And all these invisible negative flows down here is what I've been talking about. What flows out of the agricultural system are things like pollution, greenhouse gas emissions, loss of species. This is how we traditionally look at agriculture. Whereas if we start to adopt agriculture in a little bit different way, promote it differently, adopt things like smart farming, we start to look at it like this. Whereas agriculture becomes a positive thing. It can actually become a net carbon sink. It can become a place which promotes biodiversity instead of takes it away. It can become a place which increases genetic diversity of plants. So we need to really change our way of thinking about both the agricultural system and the food system and what we eat as well. I just read this yesterday on the train coming here actually, is that agroforestry, which is a new way of thinking about agriculture, is being adopted in the Amazon right now. And I'm sure you've heard that the Amazon forests have been being cut, mainly for a single product, which is soy. And what is happening right now is they really feel like adopting this type of farming practices will help to bring back and restore large areas of the Amazon and protect species like this jaguar. So I want to finish this by talking a little bit about EAT. The EAT Foundation was originally started by the Stordalen Foundation based out of Oslo and the Stockholm Resilience Center, which I'm sure you guys are well aware of. Wellcome Trust is one of our founding partners right now, supporting mainly the science that we do. They're the world's largest funder of health and science research. EAT has 3 initiatives that we run. The first is research. All of the work that we do is grounded in research. The second is events that we put on, and the third is programs that we run. Now, the 3 research themes that we are working on right now get back to a lot of what I've been highlighting during this talk. The first is metrics for healthy and sustainable diets. Business leaders, academics, political leaders are asking us, where do we go? What are those metrics? And really, when businesses know exactly where to go and what their goals are, they will go really fast. But right now, businesses don't have those metrics. We're in the process right now of focusing on developing these right now. The second thing is, what do those landscapes look like that are good for the planet, good for people, and also good for profits? Third thing is consumer behavior. How do we change consumers when they walk into the supermarket so they steer themselves away from the red meat and into fruits and vegetables? What are some techniques that we could use to help change consumer behavior? Some of the events that we run is the annual Eat Stockholm Food Forum. Maybe some of you were there last week. We had a huge event in Stockholm last week. A lot of exciting things happened, which I might talk about some of them. We work within the larger policy areas, so with the UN. And we host EatX events. The next one, which is going to be in New York in September. Some of the programs that we run are within the urban environment. The urban spaces are very exciting places. 60% of the cities that are going to be built aren't even being built yet. People are migrating into cities. This is where a lot of the action happens. And a lot of cities around the world are finding that they have to transform their food systems. And they're doing it very, very quickly. And they're much more nimble than national and international governments. So we're working with some programs like the C40 initiative, which is a collective of international cities that are really trying to change their food systems, make it more healthy and also sustainable. And also within the Nordic area, there's some really interesting initiatives going on in this region, and we just hosted a summit with them last week. World Business Council for Sustainable Development. We work very closely with them. We're implementing a new program to work with the businesses that are directly associated with them on providing them the metrics for making their business more sustainable. Knowledge networks. The Lancet Commission. We just launched that last week, and something that I'm working with very, very closely. We gathered a team of some of the top scientists in the world that think about sustainability and health-related issues. What we're going to do by June of 2017 is we are going to be able to, for once, define what is a healthy diet, because it's a bit all over the place in terms of what does it actually mean to eat healthy. This commission is going to answer that question. And also, what is a sustainable food system? So this Lancet Commission has just been launched. We've been working for a week. We hope to have results by June of next year. This is going to lead into the Chatham House Commission, which is going to produce international dietary guidelines. And if we can promote these at the UN and within countries, and just like I told you, if China makes a shift to eating less red meat, if we can develop these, we could have huge impacts all over the globe. Consumer advocacy, we work with football associations and kids to promote healthy and sustainable eating. We work with international chefs, Jamie Oliver and others, because international chefs are really the rock stars of this movement. Jamie Oliver, I'm sure some of you guys know him. He's an advocate for eating healthy, sustainable products, decreasing sugar intake. A lot of his work just led to the sugar tax, which was just put into place in the UK within the last, it's been pretty recently. So we're building a network of chefs all over the world to look into this. Those are some of the programs that we run. And I want to leave you with this. Vote with your fork. The wonderful thing about food is that every single day you get 3 votes, and every single vote is a chance to impact and change the world. Go home. Think about what you eat. Think about, do you need that steak? Promote it within your businesses. Promote it within your personal networks, because truly this is where it starts. And I think if we start to look at the networks that each one of us have right here, we could have a huge impact in this region. Now, I want to congratulate whoever cooked the food or came up with the suggestion, because that is a perfect, healthy, and sustainable diet. And that's the type of food that we need to shift to, eating less meat, eating more fruits and vegetables. With that, and together, we can actually change the world. So, thank you very much, you guys. It's been an honor to be here.
Thank you so much, Brent, and you were generous enough to give us the opportunity to ask you a few questions. So prepare your questions and raise your hand and get the attention of Tina, who has a microphone, or somebody else who has a microphone. I got a question on my own.
Yep.
You said that we get free votes today with our forks. And yes, we have been voting. Over the last 20 years, meat consumption has more than doubled in Sweden, early 90s compared to last year. So, and basically a lot of the things that you said about meat and climate and meat and health, we know. So how come we were getting it wrong, and how do we, I'd like to change China, but let's start with ourselves. How do we in our own community and our own social setting reverse the trend?
That's tough.
Well, we gotta do it.
I mean, this is why it's one of the major research themes that we're working on, is how can we actually change that behavior. And there's some interesting research going into something called nudging, where, because in a lot of cultures and a lot of places, if you tell them not to do something, they do the opposite.
Exactly.
I mean, especially
like
if you
my
think
daughter.
Right. So, I mean, if you're to tell people from the U.S. and Americans, and I don't want to single out Americans, but I am, so I guess I can. If you say eat less red meat, a lot of times they're going to do the opposite. So, I think that we need to figure out, instead of just coming up with these dietary guidelines and say stop doing something, we need to come up with a rationale for how to do it, and we need to nudge them in a direction which is good for the people and good for the planet. But also at some time, I think we might have to come up with some levels, some policy, some large-scale policy implications, like the UK sugar tax. And I think they're finding in some areas, like Mexico implemented a sugar tax about 10 years ago, and they're finding that it's having pretty positive benefits. I think if we're going to make changes, we're going to have to make red meat so expensive to eat that people, once it hits your wallet, people are going to change their consumption habits. So it could come to that.
So make it hit the wallet and be the good example yourselves, like we were at this
Absolutely.
conference today.
Absolutely.
Do we have a few questions? I'm sure we have. Do you see any? Wonderful. And please wait for the microphone, because this is recorded and we wanted to show it to the rest of the world as well. But you keep the microphone because you're next.
Given that in the long-term future, 75% of the world population are expected to live in big cities, how do you then see the importance of urban agriculture in this context? The emerging urban agriculture.
I think it's an extremely important part of the solution, but we're not going to be able to feed cities just by focusing on urban agriculture. I think what we need to do is we need to strengthen the urban-rural connection, and right now that connection is not very strong. And by strengthening the rural connection, opening up markets and direct markets into cities, we're not only going to be able to strengthen small shareholder farmers and these rural areas, but we're also going to be able to feed the cities. And that's an area where we're not doing a very good job on. So I think promoting urban agriculture, absolutely, it'll be part of the solution, but not all the solution. And also strengthening the rural-urban connection has to be done.
Do you believe that the future is to have grass-fed cows with less meat that's more expensive by having a more sustainable growth of cows?
I think the future is stop eating red meat.
Yeah, but like
I think that's where we have to go, is we need to eat less of it. There really is no way around it. Not with 9.6 billion people on this planet. And what we're talking about here is we're talking about an equity issue. We're really talking about intergenerational and also generational equity issue, right? If we're saying that we're going to feed every person on this planet should have access to the same opportunities that we have and the same diets that we have. We can't all eat red meat. So if we're truly promoting equity on this planet, we have to change our diets, including ourselves, all of us. That's going to decrease starvation, decrease obesity, increase health for people on the planet. And so, yeah, I think red meat is not the way to go.
Let's move back to you, yes.
I know that with rice, growing rice, there is also methane emissions.
Yep.
How big is that contribution?
It's pretty large, especially in the traditional rice growing where you have the water which lies stagnant within the fields, right? But there is actually some new technology where they're promoting some almost dry land type rice production, which is, if we can adopt that, it's going to have a very large impact. And if you think about, for example, some of the indigenous people on this planet, they're already doing that. Like the Dayak that I was working with, they actually had a dryland rice type of farming, which is extremely good for them and also good for the planet. And we need to promote more of that type of farming instead of selling these small plots off to other types of industries.
Hi, Niran here. I was wondering, what do you think about the viability of lab-grown proteins from vegetable proteins, but like recreating a type of meat substance like that? How viable do you think that is? I
think it's viable, and I think it has to be. I think all options have to be on the table. And something that I've just started to look into a bit more and get more interested in is food technology. I think food technology, when we're looking at bending that curve from our current path at 3.5 degrees down to the 1.8 degrees, technology and businesses are going to play a very huge role. So I think innovations such as this could potentially come in, and I don't want to look at them as panaceas because I don't think there is a panacea out there. But when you're looking at the entire menu, and I'm using all these food analogies here, but if you look at the menu of options that we have out there, I think this is definitely one that we need to look into.
I was wondering about the level of responsibility from the private person and the big corporations, because as there is a big sense of not being able to do anything and therefore being very that you feel inadequate as a person. You want to avoid palm oil, but it's in everything. You want to reduce the climate impact of what you eat. But during lunch, we talked about quinoa and how you should eat it, but then you shouldn't, and then it depends on what you look at. But what is the responsibility from the big corporations actually growing palm oil and using it in their the food that we eat? It's so hard to avoid. So how should that be balanced?
There are a number of actors out there. When you look at the palm oil industry specifically, or if you look at the meat producing industry, there are some keystone actors out there that if you impact those particular keystone actors, it's going to have a huge impact on the system. So do you change the behavior of 2 to 3 billion people that consume something like palm oil or red meat or something, or do you go straight to these keystone actors and leverage them? That's why we're developing a strong relationship with the World Business Council, because we believe in, if we can impact industries like Unilever and others, that's going to have ripple effects, and that's going to be one of those levers that a little bit of tweaking on it is going to have a large impact. But at the same time, I think all of us in here can start to make individual impacts. I think like I said, if we take our networks and start to connect our networks like we're doing here, absolutely, I think we're going to be able to make large changes. So I think we cannot forego our personal responsibilities and just say it's up to the big corporations. And also our individual responsibilities as well. We can advocate and we can actually influence consumer behavior or the behavior of businesses. So,
how do you see a change in legislation when it comes to food waste?
Like the French, for instance.
Seems like it's heading in the right direction in some places, but it's not going fast enough. I think that's one of the things why we're focusing on this Lancet Commission, so that we can start to answer some of these big questions, because people are really looking for guidance in terms of what they can do. But there's also some interesting technologies out there which are reducing food waste. And I think even if you don't wait for policies, some of these technologies are just now starting to hit the market, which are going to have a large impact on actually, reducing the waste. And the great thing about food waste, if you reduce that, you increase your profits. So it's good for people, it's good for the planet, it's also good for profits. So,
I noticed to my surprise that in the area of interest in food, there's a 7-to-1 ratio male versus female in the audience. in terms of asking questions. So we'd like to invite a few more non-male if you have an extra question. Well, it's good news because we know that we need to be gender balanced in the food industry and to change that. And perhaps it's great that the men are also on board on these topics. Any more last questions? What do you do next yourself at EAT Foundation? You said the Lancet is coming, but day by day, how do you teach this?
How do we teach it?
How do you change the world out there to becoming more food smart?
Big focus on business right now with the World Business Council. That's going to be a big thing. Focusing on the UN and really trying to bring this to some of the highest levels. I think the Lancet Commission and what will come out of that will have a big policy implications both at national and also international levels, and also at business levels. So that's where we're really focusing is really trying to define what is a healthy and sustainable diet. And once we have that done, it'll really give us clear guidelines for how to move forward. And in the meantime, we keep on going along, especially with our cities network, our chefs network, and all the other things that we're doing. So.
Excellent. Thank you ever so much, Brent. And remember, we have free votes today. Thank you.